Starting early for the first time ever. Alright. Pardon the noise. Hoping to figure out any of the technical issues that I had in the last one ahead of time. Let me know how the audio is, guys. Rob, nice to see you. Soylent Green is in short supply due to the short supply chain issues. Hey, what's up, Bambeo? Soylent Green is people. Oh, I guess I just spoiled it. That's a movie that I liked it, but I never actually watched it all the way through. So, unfortunately. So I need to go watch it again. I know the punchline, though. Good to see everybody. So, what we're going to do for this live stream is we're going to do a review of the SeeAudio X Crinacle Yume Midnight. And actually, let me just double check that I have it in here. I believe I do. Yeah, this is the case that it comes in. Yeah, so we'll do a review of the SeeAudio Yume Midnight, and then afterwards we'll do a little bit of Q&A. And it can be on the Midnight, but it could also be on other stuff as well. But I do want to let you guys know as well right now that we will have another video out tomorrow. It's on the Beyerdynamic Tiger 300R. So yeah, stay tuned for that. And then additionally, more stuff next week. Your 3 a.m. sleep-deprived self is going to die after the stream. Okay, well, I'll make sure it's not super long. All right, audio is good. All right, that sounds good. Okay, I figure we might as well get started here. I will drop timestamps after doing this because obviously I don't know how long the actual review section is going to go. But yeah, so if you're coming at this review, if you're coming at this after the live stream has already ended, look for those timestamps below for the review section, and then the Q&A will be afterwards. But let's talk about the SeeAudio X Crinacle Yume Midnight, and it is this is the box here as I showed earlier, and I'm going to start with just sort of the box and the accessories and stuff like that. Normally I don't really care that much about it, but there's both good and bad with this. So let's start with the packaging. First really good thing about the packaging is they have the frequency response on the box. Yes, thank you. More of this, please. Everybody should be doing this. I hope, I want everybody to be doing this stuff. Crinacle Plus is here, nice. This is a big thumbs up. I love that they're doing this, and I look forward to more companies adopting this trend in the future, ideally, I hope. Now, the box art, people care about that. This means nothing to me. I'm not the audience for this, but somebody might be, so this is the box art, right? Now I'm just going to open this up. We're going to get to the bad here with the packaging, and it's one that I kind of didn't really expect, and I've never really experienced this before. But as soon as I opened the box, which I'm just going to do again here, as soon as I opened the box, I was greeted with the most foul stench of petroleum products I've ever encountered, and it still reeks of that. And it's this, I think it's this material here. It's extremely pungent. I've never experienced that from opening up any box ever. So like to this degree, like you smell it like normally when you open up a new package of something, but never to this degree. So whatever they're using for this this material, I'm not a fan. I actually felt physically ill after even just leaving. It's also on the inside of the case here. So after leaving that open just on my desk while I was measuring it, I felt physically ill. Oh, well, more ill than I normally do. that is my regular day-to-day. You do get a bunch of different tips here. 2 of the SeeAudio ones. There's large and medium. There's no small for that, interestingly enough. And then you do get some additional sizes here. So that's good. This obviously pops out, but they're gonna fall out if I do that. So And then there's documentation stuff that nobody reads. Okay, that's the packaging, the good and the bad. Now onto the case. As mentioned, it has that very strong, pungent kind of smell. But I like the form factor of the case. It's pocketable and easy to use. No issues there. See, I assume it's this inside felt material that's causing that. Or I don't know what material that actually is, but the inside, the outside's it's not bad for that. Okay, now the IEM itself. Let's go over the build, the ergonomics, and the styling. Let's start with the styling. So let me just hold this up for you guys to see. If the camera can focus on it. That's what it looks like. I really like this look. It has kind of like a carbon fiber faceplate look underneath it. I don't know if you guys can see that here. It looks like a carbon fiber-ish thing with sort of it's that kind of pattern. And then it says Midnight on this side here. Or yeah, I guess you'd see it that way, Midnight. So I like the look of it. And for me, it also works great because it's black, or it's a darker, no-nonsense kind of color. I'm not a fan of the super flashy ones, the super eye-catching ones. I know some people like that. They're like, oh, it's ear candy. Like, for me, no. I'd rather not draw attention to myself with my choice of audio accessories, I suppose. But, you know, that's just me. Now, for the form factor... Yeah, the form factor here it's actually on the smaller side of things. These are, I mean, I'm just trying to see if I have a comparable here, but yeah, like if you're thinking about like those IEMs, like the SeeAudio Monarch and the Mark II of that, or like the Empire Ear stuff, those are really large. These are the opposite. These are much smaller, and they are also very, very comfortable. So I like that. Oh, what's up, Metal? Yeah. And the nozzles are also, I'm not going to take this off, but the nozzles are also not too thick. That's not too thick and they're not too long. That's a bit of an issue that I've had with IEMs in the past. That's an issue I've had with like the, oh, I can't remember the name of it. The Symphonium Helios. The nozzle was a little bit on the long side for me, but this one is totally fine for that. By the way, if you guys are wondering what the price is for this stuff, for this one, I think it's around $250. So it's a little bit more than the Kato, I believe. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong about that. And also it's more than the Timeless as well, which I also have here somewhere. And I'll give a bit of a description of this compared to the Timeless. But the form factor and the build and all of that stuff, I think is excellent. It's very comfortable. And importantly, for me at least, I have issues with IEMs that stick out too far on the back side here. Like, it kind of juts out here a little bit on this one, but it's really subtle, which is different from like this one here, the Kiwi Ears Orchestra, which is an IEM that I love. The back piece is much more pronounced, and so I find the Yume Midnight to be much more comfortable. Open in a well-ventilated area? Yes, exactly. Anyways, so as far as the tips are concerned, I liked using it with just the regular, the medium tips from SeeAudio. They work great. And then the cable is also a fairly cheap-feeling cable. This is it's a no-nonsense kind of cable, and it is a 2-pin style connector on the top here. But the cable is like clearly not a very expensive or robust cable, but it's functional and it doesn't get in the way. There is a chin cinch thing here, which works. It slides around a little bit much, but I didn't have major issues using it. I just felt that it was a little bit on the cheap feeling side. It's light. it's $200. Okay, great. This is around $200. Great. That's weird because I was looking at the it's because I live in Canada. That's the problem. So Canada, it's $250. More, yeah. So it's around the same price as the Kato and the Timeless. Anyways, So, moving on to the sound quality, let me actually just throw up the frequency response. But I can say, out the gates here that it's not neutral, but it's not far off, right? It's got just a hint of character, of flavor, and I'll show you that here as well. All right, does that work? Can you guys see that okay? All right, make sure I can still read the chat. All right, so this target I'm using here, don't take this target with a grain of salt, because it's really just based off of an IEM that I happen to like the tuning of, which is it's based on the SeeAudio Clairvoyance, which is the one that I evaluated. And so for example, this little piece here, I smoothed it as best I could, but it's just based on an IEM that the tonal balance I find agreeable, right? And so this is a little bit even more bass boosted, but I like the way that the bass boost is done. It's really, really satisfying. So I would say at the very least, there's the first little slight point of coloration is the bass boost, right? But it's done in a good way. It's more towards the sub bass, less towards the upper bass, and it tapers down. I think more important than the bass level here is the way that the bass comes down. You still get some body here in the mid bass and the upper bass before it hits the mids, but it does tend to obscure this section a little bit, I find. Just a little bit, not due to the deviation here you see compared to this target that I'm using. Again, that's just based on the SeeAudio Clairvoyance, but it's more the conjunction of the bass boost, where it comes down, and then this next sort of section here. So what I find is this does sound a little bit lean in contrast to the bass, but that's fine. Overall, that's totally fine. Now for the ear gain section, the upper mids and treble, so I personally tend to find this type of ear gain just on the right side of shouty. If it were more, I would find it to be too, I guess also partially because of this slight dip here. If it were more than this, I would find it just a little bit too intense, but it's on the right side for me. In particular for jazz tracks, music with instruments, for vocals, for anything that I think like pianos as well, to a certain degree, that type of stuff. This works really, really well. This level and this shape for the ear gain. So I would say the mid-range is one of its strengths, especially for jazz, classical, acoustic, instrumental music. If and you guys know me, my personal taste, for IEMs, I prefer the versatility of something like the Dunu SA6, that kind of slightly more relaxed tuning here. But again, for the genres that I happen to listen to the most, this type of tuning is fantastic, and it's I would even say better for that quality. Now in the treble is where things get a little bit interesting, and so you can see it's a little bit relaxed here in the lower treble, and you can see there's a peak here. Now keep in mind this is the Gross RAO 402 coupler, which has some coupler damping going on here in the treble anyway. So I actually expect this peak to be a little bit higher, but I actually hear this peak at 7K, not at 8K. So that's just something to note. I think it has to do with the, my specific ear canal. And I happen to hear this peak more at 7K and not at 8K. The other thing that I notice is that at around like 10, 11K or 10.5K, maybe there's another slight elevation. I hesitate to say peak because it doesn't come across as a peak. It's more just like a slight forwardness. So the way that I hear this is, and I mentioned this to a couple of friends as well, I hear this as kind of like an IEM where each distinct range of the tonal balance is identifiable and discernible from everything else. So what do I mean by that? Well, the bass is very easy to just go, okay, the bass comes through in a very distinct, almost like subwoofer kind of character. The mids then come through with you know, that slight extra clarity towards the upper mids, which makes them stand out a little bit for certain tones. And then the treble is focused a little bit more towards mid treble and upper treble as opposed to lower treble. And so I think the way I would characterize this is the downside here with the treble is that you lose a little bit of focus, a little bit of tonal focus for things like cymbal hits, snare drums, percussive hits, and things like that in favor of, you know, the upper elements of that, the upper harmonics, but just a little bit. And this does give it just a hint of extra excitement up there as well. Now, importantly, in the upper treble, the Yume Midnight is extremely well extended. And that's something that, like if I'm just thinking of like the Blessing to Dusk, I actually think I prefer this tonal balance over the Blessing to Dusk. Just because I find the upper treble to be a little bit, you know, better. So and certainly more so than the SA6 as well. And those are much more expensive. Well, Blessing to Dusk is a little more expensive, and the SA6 is considerably more expensive. So what we have for the tonal balance here is very, very good for the $200 price range. Extremely good. And so, you know, it's not perfect to what I like. There's just a few little quirks there, but it works very well. Again, especially for jazz, classical, acoustic, that type of stuff. If you're listening to more aggressive genres like rock and metal and stuff like that, I'm always going to recommend something that's got a little bit less, you know, 2.5, 3K. But for good music, this type of tuning is a lot of fun, and you can think of it kind of like, you know, neutral-ish with a bass boost. I'm not going to call it exactly neutral because there are just a few quirks here and there, like the slight treble bump that I hear it again at 7K, but it's going to be around 8K. I think for maybe for most people it'll probably be around 8K. And then yeah, the bass elevation, but that's where we get into the subjective stuff. And let me just get rid of that. There we go. And well, we'll go back to the measurements in a second here, and I'll compare it against the Timeless. But yeah, for the subjective stuff, again, I think the standouts here are bass and mids. They're very detailed, good instrument separation, all of the things that you would expect at a higher price. So I have to caveat this a little bit and say that I have not heard the original Yume. So what I'm going to be doing with this one is I'm going to be setting it down to Precog Vision, our IEM specialist, because he has, and so he'll be able to compare this against that. And then I'll also be sending the other Crinacle IEMs, Crinacle Collab IEMs, down to him so he can do a bit of a comparison there. But with the technical performance here, I find the bass to be a notable standout, and it's better than what I was expecting. So, and then also for the mid-range detail as well. I think part of that is, well, you can't see the measurement here, but I think part of that is also because of the slightly enhanced focus towards the upper mids. I think if I had my way, the only thing that I would really change with this would be I would have a little bit more information in the lower mids, so there's not as much distance between the upper mids and lower mids. I think that's really the only thing that I would do that I would do differently. But yeah, as far as instrument separation, detail, contrast, it's all much better than I was expecting at this price. Even I thought it was going to be more expensive, so it's better than that. Now, is it Blessing 2 level? I'm gonna say in the bass it at least is good, but I think for the rest, like for the mids and for the treble, I think maybe not quite. But yeah, it's funny. I mentioned to Crin after having heard this, I mentioned, wow, yeah, good job, because this is impressive. And I've heard a lot of other IEMs that are well tuned. There's some other ones like from SeeAudio, for example. I can't remember which one it is, but it's the blue one. It's well tuned, but the problem is that there's just not really any detail. It just sounds a little bit, lifeless and a little bit constrained. And this doesn't have any of those issues. This has good clarity for trailing ends of tones, and as I mentioned, reasonably good instrument separation. I wouldn't say this is the widest or most spacious presentation, but it's also decent. Certainly better than what you get with those Moondrop dynamic driver IEMs, like the Starfield and the KXXS and stuff like that. And again, also I'll need to compare this against the Kato when I do if I do a Kato review. But those types of Moondrop dynamic driver IEMs typically don't have a very good soundstage, and this is definitely better. So overall, I'm going to say that I'm very impressed, very surprised, and impressed with the sound quality of the Yume Midnight. Now, let's see how this compares against the 7 Hz Timeless. And I'm going to bring up the graphs again. And 1 second here. You're going to have to bear with me. Okay. So where's my other image? There it is. Okay, so this is the 7 Hz Timeless, and I actually like the Yume Midnight better than the 7 Hz Timeless. I know everybody loves the Timeless and it's this hyped IEM, and I think it's also the best planar IEM that I've heard, because it actually has the good tuning, generally. But it's got its issues, and the first one is that it is a little bit on the bloated side for the upper bass. I find this to be just, I mean, it's warm, yes, in that region. It's a little forward, but I find it to be just a little too thick for my taste. Then there's some kind of esoteric stuff going on here. I don't like this type of stuff. Is a bit weird, but you know, the general trend there is you know, it's kind of what you want. And so none of these little quirks are major issues, and I don't think that we should really evaluate them as major issues. It's just, I think it's just a consequence of the way planar drivers work, you know, planar driver modes and things like that, which I'm learning more about. It's very interesting. But the bigger issue is the treble peak here, and this. So again, because there's driver damping, or because there's a coupler resonance damping going on here with this this coupler, the RIO 402. This is going to be even a little bit higher here in reality. So it's definitely like this kind of warm, bright character. And so I'm not as enthusiastic about, well, let me put it this way. It's better than everything else that's a planar for an IEM as far as the tuning goes, but not necessarily better than all IEMs at this price point for the tuning, right? And so I think really with the Timeless, you have to lean into the technical capabilities. So for example, the instrument separation and control during busy passages that the planar transducer affords you. And for that, I do have to give the edge to the Timeless. I think that, you know, for those qualities, being able to sort of isolate individual instrument lines and things like that, I do think that the Timeless is a little bit better. However, with the Timeless, and so just to be clear, I absolutely thoroughly recommend the Timeless. I didn't do a review of it, but this is, you know, my general comments are yes, it's very, very impressive. However, I would still take the Yume Midnight. And the main reason for that is I find that the 7 Hz Timeless has a very recognizable and noticeable planar magnetic timbre. And with the Yume Midnight, it's the timbre. Let me just actually switch this over again. There you go. So you can see it's a little bit closer to my preference, even just, you know, across the board. So you get the idea. But yeah, so let me just go back to what I was saying about the timbre. Pardon me. I don't find the Yume Midnight to have a particularly egregious balanced armature timbre, even though there are balanced armatures going on. Keep in mind I think it's only 3 drivers, 2 nulls for mids and 1 for mid and 1 for treble, and then a dynamic driver for the bass. And they make a big deal about, you know, what they did with the bass and how they implemented it, and it's effective clearly. But I didn't have any issues, yeah, with the balanced armature timbre, or not as strong of an issue with the balanced armature timbre as I did with the planar magnetic timbre of the Timeless. And I think that's really, like, if you're okay with a planar magnetic timbre, the timeless is going to be like the technical qualities are going to really shine through for you, and you're going to really enjoy those. But if you're even a little bit annoyed by that quality, that's sort of like I think Max calls it a plasticky quality. I've called it a bit of like a plucked character. It's hard to describe if you haven't heard it, but it's really noticeable on the timeless. And I'm noticing it more and more on other like I find myself bothered by it more and more after having heard the timeless, because now I'm paying attention to that quality a little bit more because it was so recognizable. And then also on the Yume Midnight, it's a lot more punchy and contrasty in the bass, whereas on the timeless, the bass is a little bit on the compressed side. Now, again, the bass, it's still at the right level for like the sub bass on the timeless, but it's more that it's not as distinct, I think, as I would like. Interestingly, another IEM that is a little bit more gradual there for the bass, that I think also does a little bit better, is the Keybeaters Orchestra here, this is one of my favorite sounding IEMs, but it's obviously more expensive. So, anyways, that's a bit off topic. So, in conclusion, for this review portion here, let me just hold that. Come on, focus. There we go. The SeeAudio Yume Midnight is excellent. It's at the moment, I think it's the $200 IEM to beat, and the more interesting comparison I think is going to be with the Moondrop Kato. But again, I think you're when it comes to that, I think the question is going to be more, do you want a single dynamic driver IEM, or are you willing to go with a hybrid? And I guess answering that question is going to determine which one you go for. And so I can see reasons to go for either one of them. I may do a Moondrop Kato review, and then I may compare it to this. We'll do that in the future if we do. But at the moment, I would put this as probably my favorite at the $200 price mark. Not even probably. I'm going to say definitely my favorite at the $200 price mark, even though, there are other IEMs around that price that are also extremely competitive, and you're going to just need to decide which qualities are most important to you. Another interesting thing, I just remember that I did test the harmonic distortion on this, or I did check for it. Normally with balanced armature or hybrids, anything that uses balanced armature drivers, you do get fairly high third order harmonic distortion, third and fifth usually. And with this one, it's not that. It's actually lower than what I was expecting, and no fifth. I only found third harmonic distortion really, second and third. But third is usually the one that's elevated, and it is still elevated over the others, but it was lower on this than what I was expecting. So that's interesting. Anyways, that's basically that's that. As I mentioned, we'll be sending this down to Precog Vision, the IEM specialist, who has he's reviewed the original Yume, so he's going to do that comparison, plus the other Crinacle collab IEMs like the Eclipse, like the Kern. The Kern, it's got a good tuning, but the treble is not great, but the rest of the tuning is good on that one. Obviously, it's just a cheap, budget IEM that, yeah. But we'll have Precognition do the full comparison there, and I think he may have a Blessing to Dusk. If not, we'll send one down there for him to kind of do the whole lineup. Anyways, I'm going to now move on to the Q&A portion of this. Wow, we did that in less than 30 minutes. Awesome. Feel free to ask any questions about the Yume Midnight or other questions in general, and I will do my best to answer them. And I see there's already some discussion going on here. Ooh, Zero Sins in the chat. Phil. When are you going to send me the Phil phone? I think we talked about that. Subwoofer like bass qualities. Yeah, so what I mean by that is that, like, when you have a subwoofer, okay, for the reason that if you look at, like, for over-ear headphones, if you look at the Harman target, right? The there's a dip at around 200 hertz, right? That dip is technically, and I've learned this through talking with a number of people who know more than I do. That dip is the bottom part of the ear gain, right? There was an old image that people used to use to indicate where the different parts of the ear gain would be. And apparently that image is just wrong, or it was like the only thing that people had at the time, and so they used it, but there's more to it than that. So anyways, the point is more that like where the bass shelf is for Harman is roughly where the crossover would be for subwoofers. So that's what I mean when I say that, you know, it has a distinct subwoofer like character to the bass. Not that it's like having a subwoofer. You don't. It's not like that. It's more just like that. You know, that distinct kind of rise that elevates more towards the sub bass is going on, and you know, there's no. It doesn't sort of crowd out anything else in the mids. Now I think it's less so on this than something like the Symphonium Helios. The Symphonium Helios is it's much more distinct than this, but there is a sense in which I think maybe more so because the lower portion of the mids are just a little bit relaxed on the midnight, that the upper mids coming through with a little bit more clarity make that element of the mid-range sound distinct from the bass, right? So yeah, what I mean by that is that, you know, basically each different range of the frequency response sounds very distinct from one another. And so I think if I'm going to criticize the sound here, it's that it's perhaps not the most cohesive IEM. You know, it's one where it almost like asks you to like listen critically for different elements of the frequency range, but in a way that's also enjoyable, if that makes sense. By the way, did Crinacle's account get blocked because of giveaways? I have no idea why his account got blocked, or his Google account got deleted. I'm not sure. That's something only Crinacle can answer. Let's see. What are you guys talking about? Oh, you're talking about the timeless. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I've been really enjoying the, where is it? I have it here somewhere. Qdelix 5K. So like my go-to IEM right now that I am just like, I need to do a review of it probably, but the Moondrop Variations is just outstanding. It's crazy good for the price. And for me, the tuning of the Variations is just on the edge of shout. Like, you know, I mentioned it earlier when I was talking about the Midnight, where, you know, the let's say quote unquote normal ear gain for me is just usually a little too much or not quite versatile enough. And then it's the same on the Variations. They always have that kind of tuning. It's not as bad for me as like the Moondrop S8. I know the Moondrop S8 is very technically capable, but for me that is just like shout for days. I don't like other people might not have that same issue because, you know, either due to the music they're listening to, or, you know, the shape of the ear canal and the way that resonance works for them. But for me, it's just way too much. So the Variations isn't like that. It's like, even just by default, it's fine. It's just that I prefer it to be even a little less. So I've been using the Qdelix 5K to kind of drop that section a little bit, and after doing that, like really just by like 1.52 dB, that tuning is very fun. Yeah. Best sub bass IEM for $200. I think it depends on if you want quality or level. So Yume is balanced with bass boosted like the Dusk. Yeah, it's got a few other quirks, I would say. Like a few other things that just stand out to me. Like the distance between the mids and upper mids, for example, like that 7K, 8K peak. But at the same time, it's also got better treble extension. So, you know, there's that. What is your favorite color? Color is a curse. Favorite color is matte. I think the ear gain image was from Tile, but only concerned a single sound angle, which is why Blaine crucified us. Yeah, but he also used that only because he didn't have anything better at the time. And I remember that from his presentation, like that big long presentation video. And he even indicated that it was like maybe not perfect, but it was to show, it was to make a point. And then it got, you know, used everywhere else, you know. That's sort of how that stuff goes. Kind of getting bored with Crin's releases now. Seems like they're all tuned similarly. Would be interested in something that is tuned uniquely. I disagree. I actually don't think they're tuned similarly. If you look at the Eclipse, that's not tuned. The Eclipse is more, let's say, colored than I would say neutral, or than the other ones. The Dusk is the one that Dusk and Midnight are probably the ones that I think he is more like, okay, this is more correct, I guess. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely like, I think that the target here is neutral with the bass boost. I think that's, but the thing is, the original Yume also measured well. I think the goal with this one is to just make it a little bit more technically impressive. Maybe specifically for the bass, but he can fill you in on that. Oh, you're waiting to send me a bunch of stuff? Okay, awesome. Looking forward to that. Would you call the HD650 shouty, just to get an idea of where your threshold is for that? So it's interesting because for over-ear headphones, I don't have the same, like my tolerance is a lot wider for over-ear headphones. With IEMs, as soon as it's like on the wrong side of that, it's like, no, I can't deal with it. So I'm much more sensitive to it with IEMs. And I think it's I mean, that makes sense because there's one particular, a very significant contribution to ear gain is the thing that you're having the thing interact with, and I think to a certain extent a lot of that can also depend on insertion depth as well. So there's that. So it's like, it's more like you know, that you're dealing with, you're not dealing with additional ear gain factors that your brain is sort of, you know, expecting to hear. So that's already kind of like baked into, you have to anticipate, I guess, anticipate what that would be, rather than having it actually interact with them. The other is that you're kind of at the mercy of what fits. And if the fit is such that, you know, you're getting more amplification there. Like, for example, when I show the measurement here, let me just show you that. Right, when I show the measurement, the way that you actually hear this isn't necessarily exactly what this shows. This is just what it shows based on the coupler, right? And the coupler is going to have its own unique resonances. Now it's based on, it's meant to be accurate, or based on, let's say, you know, human ears, right? But it's not an actual human ear. That's the point I'm making. And for my actual human ear and the way that IEMs typically fit for me, I think it amplifies maybe a little bit more strongly at that region. And certainly in this case with the Yume Midnight, that peak wasn't perceptible at 8K. It was perceptible at 7K. So it shifted a little bit. Looking cute today? What? I need to get a haircut. It's bad. Oh, somebody's asking about what these headphones are. This is the Focal Elir with the Utopia pads. I just play. It's similar to the Alex. Just playing around with different pads and trying it. I'm running it off of the. It's one of my favorite combinations right now. I'm running it off of the Amps and Sound Kenzie out of the 32 I'm out. So even kind of like, it's my guilty pleasure thing right now. I'm really enjoying it. It's very like, it's a little warmer. Like it warms it up just a tiny bit. and smooths out the treble a little bit, and then it's also really punchy. Not like the amp isn't the thing that's making it punchy. The headphones are really punchy. Thank you, Mensria. Do you have a question? Oh, I see it. I'm stuck in the Apple ecosystem. Is there a great EQ app available that you could recommend? For Apple? Man, I am not the right person to ask for that. I am not in the Apple ecosystem. I can't really help with EQ apps for Apple, but somebody did mention one once, and I forget what it is. So somebody, if you have one in mind, leave it in the chat. But I can give you somewhat of an answer for using it on Mac OS, and my recommendation would just be, if you can swing it, Rune is a fantastic service. The problem with Rune is that it's just expensive, and it's not system-wide, it's just for the music that you're playing, but it has a lot of functionality there. I'd say if you're really seriously into audio, it's worth it. But it is, of course, an additional spend that, would be better put towards, equipment, in my view. So I have a hard time saying go out and buy Rune, for the EQ, if potentially a free EQ is available. That's the real benefit to EQ. But it is well implemented in Rune. Another thing, I don't know, it might also be worth looking at. I saw some apps that were like integrating with Spotify. That might be something to consider. Topping A90 and D90S with Hi-Fi Man Aria. What do you think? I'm not a fan of the A90. I'll need to do a video on that. Taryn keeps bugging me to do a video on that. Qdelix 5K is the best EQ app for iOS. I agree. Qdelix 5K is nuts. Wow, here it is. Yeah, everyone, this thing is. I have nothing but glowing things to say about it. People are like freaking out about like, oh, you didn't talk about the sound quality of the other ones. Yeah, because they don't really sound much different from one another if you're not using the functions. I'm not going to show the measurements of these because it's flat, right? They don't change anything. There's no signature. It's only on the IFI with the boost functions. I also notice the difference of tolerance of ear gain for myself between headphones and IEMs. I have no problem with the stock HD 580, but ER4 sounds like 3K of death, even with deep fit. Yeah, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that it's interacting. You're literally putting it into the place that is the strongest contribution of ear gain. So I think there's an element of that. The other element is I think what Crin said before about manufacturers having to guess what your brain would expect, because you don't get the additional gain factors. Is that right? Is that an accurate characterization of the position, Crin? Let me know if I've butchered that, but I believe that's what you said. This is a hybrid, so it doesn't have a problem which many hybrids have in terms of crossover. I think the bad crossover can cause IEM to kill the clarity of the sound quality. What do you think about this? This is something interesting. So I think there's a number of things that you could potentially see in both frequency response and harmonic distortion. And so if there were issues there, I think you would be able to identify them. And I with this one, I didn't notice any of those issues. But there is a school of thought that a number of manufacturers go for with, not having that, not doing that. And there are others. So, for example, Campfire has made a big deal about crossoverless and stuff like that. And I actually even emailed them a long time ago asking about this, and what their reasoning was for it. And apparently they've been doing that type of stuff for a long time. But now they've just decided to market it, I guess. I don't know. But the whole crossoverless idea in and this is just my view. I'm totally open to being wrong on this, but in my view, if the implementation is done well, it's less of an issue. I don't think it's an issue. And I'm thinking of examples of like the best IEMs that I've heard for those qualities that you mentioned are hybrids and tribrids. So I think a lot of it has to do with implementation. What is going on with Phil and Crin? SeeAudio Dusk. Yeah. Yeah. But it's a worthwhile question to ask, I think. There's also there's a lot of different stuff going on with IEMs, but like for example, there's people who push towards single dynamic driver stuff, for reasons like, you know, timbre and things like that, or like dynamics, whatever that means. And when you listen to a single dynamic driver IEM and you compare that against a multi-BA or a hybrid, they do sound different. But I think the like, at least for me personally, I would prefer, like, my ideal IEM is a hybrid. Like, actually my favorite IEM is just all BAs, which is the U12T, but like that's more just because that one happens to be extremely well tuned and very technically capable for its BAs, and so it doesn't feel like you're losing out on, you know, like that sense of punch and physicality. But if I could have an Empire Ears Odin, or like one of those, you know, super high end resolving, I'm just thinking of like there's some others like Tia Forte and stuff like that. If I could have that with the tuning of the U12T, I would probably take those. Yeah. Campfire Andromeda 2020 worth the money on the secondhand market? I don't like buying IEM secondhand. I never recommend that. That feels weird to me, and I'm not a fan of that. But like personally, just you don't know what a couple of things you don't know. Like, there's hygiene issues with that, but the second is you don't know what people have done with them, what sources they've been running, and BAs in particular can be a little bit prone to, like, if you blast it, that stuff can actually die. They're not as foolproof, I guess. But if you can get one for $700, I'd say that's a good deal. Let's see. The output is so puny from the QLux 5K. The balanced output, you mean for power? Or you mean the physical? Because the 2.5 millimeter output is a little better. I mean, I share the concern, yeah. So it's kind of like some of the auto EQ presets there, many of them are kind of pointless, I think, because you wouldn't be running those headphones off of a device like this. This is like a portable thing, at least in my view. This is a portable thing for conventional headphones or lower impedance headphones, easier to drive headphones, more sensitive headphones, and IEMs. That's really how I see it. Unless you're going with like a, you know, one of the tin hi-fi P something, those planars that are like super power hungry. But yeah, for the most part, it's meant for portable use. What's your top 3 closeback headphones at any price? I actually have a ranking list that has top 3 closeback headphones. So my top 3 right now are, number 1 is the LCD XC with EQ. Number 2 is the ZMF Verite closed with EQ. And number 3 is the Focal Stellia, also with a little bit of EQ. But the reason why I put the Verite C ahead of the Stellia is because it's going to pair a little bit better with tube amps, and that there's some fun to be had there. Whereas the Stellia, if you run it with high output impedance, you're going to do weird things to the FR, especially in the bass. I think technical Yume has been achieved, but I still can't say exact what exactly made it happen. See, that's interesting, right? Like, and when you tried it, you're probably pleasantly surprised. Do the Monarch Mark II really hold their own against the Z1R and higher priced IEMs? Yeah, for certain aspects. Depends on what you're looking for, though. I mean, it's very different. Those two are very different. Like, if you want bass quality, I would say the Z1R is probably still better. But the Monarch Mark II, I think, has a better tuning. I mean, it's my kind of tuning, right? It's a more, let's say, analytic, neutral, you know, referencey, listen to all different pieces of the music kind of tuning. And you know, the Z1R is maybe a little bit more good flavor. That makes sense. No DCI stealth on my closeback. No, because well, a couple reasons. One is for the position that it fit the best for me. It was shouty. It was noticeably shouty and wrong for the the tuning didn't work for where the, you know, so if I'm sitting there, you know, with a $4,000 closeback headphone and wearing it, you know, it's comfortable, sure, but I'm going to wear it in the position that it's the most comfortable, and in that position the tuning didn't quite work. I think for other people it might be different. The second reason is that it lacks the sense of contrast and punch. Like, it just doesn't have it. I mean, that's their whole approach to this, is to do fairly heavy driver damping, front damping specifically. That one is a little different because it's not like using those tuning filters, but it's still a kind of very sophisticated waveguide that they're doing. And then the whole point there as well is it's a lower resonance frequency than I had before, but they get the rest of the bass extension there with the seal. I don't know. I think that's just the limitations that you have with closeback planars. I don't think there's any other way to do it. So for me, I mean, yes, like the same thing with the LCD XC. It's also not a particularly contrasty headphone. The thing is, though, I actually think that the LCD XC is more technically, like, it's more detailed than the Stealth. I was actually even comparing them the other day. And now that I have my LCD XC EQ dialed in, that's the big difference, though. With the Stealth, you potentially don't have to EQ anything at all because its tonal balance is already great if you get it to fit in the right spot. But with the LCD XC, I think it needed EQ, it needed a bit of a bass boost, and it needed some fixing of the treble. But now that it's dialed in, it's more detailed. Like, I'm sorry, I know it's like less than half the price, but it's more detailed. And not just because it's got up, like, when I say EQ, I mean like curb some of that upper treble as well. Tia Forte is just a wasted opportunity. Even in a short demo, you can clearly hear it has top of the line technicality, but the tuning is so mega weird. I think, though, in some ways, though, like, that's the consequence of top tier technicality may be weird tunings, you know? Like, again, my favorite tuning is the U12T. I like the SA6, that type of tuning, you know, that's a little bit more versatile. And I think partially the reason for that is because I use IEMs portably. I think maybe if I was, you know, using it exclusively at a desk in a quiet environment and, you know, only listening to my jazz and instrumental tracks, then I'd be okay with a little bit more ear gain there, yeah, like a little bit more of these kind of normal tunings. But I like that somewhat relaxed tuning as a, I hesitate to say guilty pleasure because to me it just sounds less fatiguing. It sounds more normal. But again, that's partially due to my own ear canal and the fit. I might have to make a video. Meze is baddened. Wait, Ryan, do you wait, is your name Mark or Ryan? It's Mark Ryan Sally. I feel like I've gotten them backwards. I apologize. Anyways, did you say you like the Meze? Who said, okay, Metal says metal Meze is junk. I don't see. Anyways, I can't find it. I'm lost. IEMs have to make more assumptions about your HRTF. That's exactly what I'm saying. Yeah, IEMs have to make more, so the manufacturer has to assume more. Yeah, exactly. And headphones have to make more assumptions than speakers. Yes, so this is like, you know, there's less stuff that it's actually interacting with for you physically. You know, that's a much more eloquent way of describing of putting it than what I was trying to say. I haven't had an experience with the Stellium VC myself. Oh. Yeah, with the VC, the big issue is the 5K thing. Like, I would probably need to change the pads and stuff like that. I really would love it if, like, my dream headphone is like a Verite closed with the tuning of the Auteur. That's like the perfect headphone for me. Wait, somebody else bought in the midnight? Oh. Humble got it. Okay. Have you heard the 2021 HANA yet? It should probably be one of your benchmarks in the sub $300 mark. I know, I believe Precog Vision reviewed it, and I need to check that out. Yeah, I'm interested in that one for sure. I have some, I don't know, for me, like, I don't think you can review something based on just looking at the frequency response. But there are certain things that if you've heard something that's similar, you can get a sense. So, but yeah, I am curious about the HANA. 99 Classics with the Brainwaves Microsuede pads is my guilty pleasure. Yeah. The default pads that they sell them with now, I think, are just too bassy. Yeah, I mean, it's funny with the Eclipse. Like, sure, I can see why people like it, but the Eclipse just isn't for me. It's like I much prefer the Yume Midnight. But as I mentioned, I'll send the Yume Midnight down to and the Eclipse down to Precog Vision, and he'll do the whole comparison there, and he'll be able to also compare against, you know, like the HANA 2021 and stuff like that. Thoughts on the Drop plus Hi-Fi Man HER7DX closeback headphone? Yeah, that was just recently got announced. It's interesting that it's a dynamic driver headphone. So apparently we may get one sent in for review. I don't know when that's going to be. It might not. Like, the problem is I live in Canada, and Canada's not great at, you know, shipping and customs. Well, it depends on which courier gets used, I guess. Some of them are better than others, but sometimes it just means that you know, stuff shows up a couple days after everybody else gets it. But yeah, I should be reviewing that one sometime soon. It is interesting that it's a dynamic driver, and I think currently the biggest knock against it is that we know where all the different parts except for the cup come from. So like it's got the housing structure of the Deva or HE5XX. It's got the pads, you know, that fit with that one, so that's similar there already. It's got the headband of the older, you know, HE400 or HE4 style, and so, you know, somebody I think mentioned that it looks like a bit of a Frankenphone, and it does, but it'll be interesting. I'm curious. I think their big thing that they need to figure out is, I mean, they've got planars figured out pretty well, but for dynamic driver stuff, that's still something that I think they got to work on. So I'm curious if they've achieved it with the R7DX, and keeping in mind that with a closeback, it's also tricky. So yeah. Are the Celesti or LCD XC worth $800 more than the Allegias given their current price points? Yeah, I would say so. I mean, less so the Celestia, because you could theoretically just EQ the Elegia and get it to be, you know, pretty close. But the XC is, I mean, the problem with the XC, and I've said this before, is that it's the weight. The weight is, it's a very heavy headphone. Edition XS, yeah, we'll be trying to, I'll be trying to get one of those in to review. It'd be great. Review of the Abyss Diana TC. I don't expect to be doing a review of that anytime soon. I don't think, unless somebody wants to send one. You know, I don't imagine they would have any interest in sending me one, so. I don't know if this is, I'm just totally speculating here, but like I get the sense that anybody who is going to be focused on anything objective, you know, even though I'm, you know, a fence sitter, let's say, just like Crin, anybody who's focused on doing measurements of any kind with their headphones, I think is an immediate nope from their end, which I just don't think they're interested in having coverage like that, which is, yeah. If they think it's bad for business, you know, what reason do they have to send it to reviewers like me? Base lightweights, all ya. Crane, when are you gonna fix your target? Yeah, I saw there were some comments before about like reasons to not use Harman or something with a base shelf, because the base shelf is all just preference. So you would, and I'm thinking of Crin's target is flat there, and part of the reason there is that you can actually show, you know, how much the base shelf is. I have somewhat of a different opinion on that, because so I used to think that raw measurements were the way to go, and that compensated measurements were not as good because you didn't necessarily know what the target was, and you'd be better off, you know, learning how to read the raw measurements. And to a certain extent, I think that's still true. You're better off understanding how headphones should measure, you know, from a raw graph. But the problem is you can't expect that everybody's gonna. That's a barrier to entry that, you know, requires at least some foundational knowledge about measurements. And so in some ways I've changed my mind on that, and I actually think that the best way to show a measurement would be to show a compensated one against, and I've been convinced of this by Blaine as well, but to show a compensated measurement against like the actual well, it'd be closer to DF basically. It would be, you know, something like the actual KEMAR measurements that get supplied, or KEMAR HRTF that gets supplied, and then comping that. So basically you'd have the main benefit of this would be that you wouldn't need to actually smooth. You wouldn't be doing a fine-grained measurement against a coarse-grained target. That's the benefit. But the problem with that is that also requires an entirely new, like, I guess, consciousness around measurements, and we've gotten a little bit of inertia from those who are already doing measurements and those who are reading measurements. This goes back to Jude's measurements as consumer content thing. So I think it's just going to take, time, and it's going to take work. And I'm not there yet. DMS can send the Abyss. Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. I think the only time we're going to be able to do that is if a community member sends one in. Actually, a community member is going to be sending in that Solitaire P, the T+A Solitaire P, which is going to be interesting. So that's the next one of the next, like, you know, ultra high end, ridiculously expensive headphones that I'll be evaluating. Display both raw and comped like a man. Oh, by the way, I should have mentioned, speaking of Crinacle, the channel matching on both. The channel matching was good on the. I did do the channel matching measurement, and I will post that as well. But it was good. So I guess there's no QC issues with this one. Not that I can. Not that I found with a sample size of 1. Display, but yeah. So. I do think, like, I don't know, from my perspective, there's no reason to go with, there's no reason not to include a base shelf if you're going with comped, because if you're looking for what is, like, most, if you're trying to, like, indicate what is most preferred by, you know, most people, where we're talking about literally, like, the shelf adjustments that were made in the research, there's no reason not to use that. The only time that when you would use, if you had a very specific audience, you could use whatever target you want. But if you're talking about like a general audience and you're just talking to like the world, you know, I see no reason to go with anything other than what the you know, research indicates. You know, for the best research currently available. So, and that's the thing, is that there is. I mean, all right. I wonder if I can show this. I will, let me just open up I'll show you guys here in a second. I'll open up a measurement. Let's see, what can I find? I want to find something that is a little bit on the weird side, but still decent. Do we do Aurora Audio Borealis? That's not weird enough. That's actually pretty good. All right, maybe Focal Alex. Let's see if this will do. You'll understand the point that I'm making here in a second. Oh no, that's not the right one. Hold on a second. Talk amongst yourselves. Bug Metal 571 per second. Do I have a Utopia measurement here? Let's see if I have a Utopia measurement. All right. So we have a Utopia measurement. I just grab the averages. And this will make sense in a second, and I've showed this before. This is an old measurement that I did with a different process, but it's okay. Normalize at around 500 hertz. Okay, close enough. So the point that I'm trying to raise here is this. All right, Focal Utopia from a ways back. With a different process. Matched at 500 hertz. Okie doke. So, and this is an average, right? So the main thing that is the main reason why why conducting measurements and showing measurements relative to Harman is challenging. I don't want to say it's a problem, because I think we should be doing this, but it's challenging because Harman is smoothed to like 1/3 or 1/2 octave. I've been on this train for the last like week, but it's also something that's like important for if you're going to do EQ and stuff like that. Um, the main reason why it's challenging is because the result that you get is not smooth to the same degree. And if you were to smooth it to the same degree, you would, let me just show you what that looks like. You would get something that actually is a lot closer, right? So this is basically like if this is the Focal Utopia relative to Harman and smooth to the same degree that Harman is, right? Also, the narrative that the Utopia is bright, I don't get that narrative. It looks pretty warm to me, also off of a low output impedance source. But the point, I think you get the point. You don't know what the version of this would be, the version of this target would be if it weren't smoothed. And so when we're evaluating this stuff and we're saying, oh yeah, it should be smooth here, it should match there. Okay, maybe, but you don't know how that's going to be for each individual person. You don't know what the high-res version of this tonal balance is going to be for each individual person, given the various different gain factors that they have. And so, I mean, I mean, to a certain extent, you have to sort of, I guess, go with an average because of that, you have to smooth with a target. Like if you were to show just a fine-grained result, that would be just for, you know, that particular anthropometric ear or that ear simulator, not a general, not general purpose. But if you look at what the actual factors are of that ear, it's very different from it. Like in this, above 5K at least, it's very different. And we know about the concha notch here. We know that we want there to be a dip there. But, you know, because it's a highly smooth target, it's not reflected in the target. And so this is something that I have to work on improving, I guess, the public consciousness about, if that makes sense. Because, you know, if we're just looking at like, oh, you know, it deviates here, there's a dip, there's a peak, whatever. I mean, smoothness is desirable, yes, but I think we need to be way more careful about judgments for anything above 5K. And it's also one of the reasons why EQing with a profile, like just throwing on an EQ profile or matching a target is bad, and then just being done is bad. Like you can use the profile and you can match a target if you want, but that's like the easiest and first thing that you should do. You need to actually listen for where, you know, things sound like there's a peak, or where things sound like peaks are easier to identify than dips. But yeah. Sorry, that's also a bit of a rant, but that's something that I'm working on to try and improve the readability and usefulness of graphs, and to better understand how we should be EQing, because it's something I had to learn as well. You know, when I first started doing this stuff, I looked at like, oh, here's the target, I should try and get it to match. And then you go, okay, yeah, it'll sound better than, you know, if the headphone has a weird frequency response and you're turning the EQ on versus off, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily optimal. And this is also why I think when people, you know, I'll do a video on the limits of EQ at some point, but this is why I think when people, you know, they use profiles, sometimes a lot of people go, I don't like that, and they think, oh, I don't like the tuning, or I don't like Harman, or I don't like the result, or whatever, you know, the person ended up with, therefore I don't like EQ. But I think in reality it's that they approached it with thinking that it could do more than it actually could. I think I probably approached it that way too in the past, when really you need to be doing what metal has done forever with EQ, and doing it, you know, just by well, there's a number of methods that you can do it. Right now I just use I use Rue to figure out, you know, how, like, for sweeps and things like that, to figure out where things are louder. But like you got to be actually listening to it as well to get those specific peaks and dips in line with where your ear is amplifying, where your own ear is amplifying. Hey, Rizal, what do you think about the posts on the LCD5 connector breaking? Also, how is LCD5 with the EQ versus Susvara? Yeah, it's better at some things at least. Um, as far as the connector breaking thing, yeah, I don't know. I that's bad. um, I don't know enough about that situation to know if it's a common, consistent problem. All we know is that there's been examples of it, right? So, I mean, Odyssey is not immune from QC issues. Nobody's immune from QC issues. And you know, neither is Hi-Fi Man, neither is Focal, neither is Sennheiser. I had a Sennheiser. As much as Sennheiser's like generally really good, they one of the only headphones that actually had a massive channel imbalance, like to a broken degree, was the 660S that I tried the first time, and you know, I you know, got a different one in, right? And that's just sort of my take on that stuff. Like, I think if something has a massive channel imbalance, get another unit. See if you can get something that is better, right? Because everybody has those QC issues. So I don't have any opinion on the Odyssey thing other than that's a problem. That should be better. But enjoyment are not about measurement. Remember, we are all dead inside. No. Right, okay. I think... So yes. So I'm certainly dead inside. I think, and I think it's because I get enjoyment from measurements. Or did you mean to say we're not all dead inside like you? How do you mentally evaluate the percentage improvement between ER2XR and SeeAudio Monarch Mark II when deciding to purchase? I don't think you can base it on percentage, because the percentage is going to vary depending on how much you care. Your internal decision-making process is, you know, like I could throw out a number for you, but that's not going to be how it is for you necessarily, right? It's something you need to figure out on your own, how much it matters to you. For me, it matters, and also your means too, right? Like, because for some people it's like $200, that's like a big spend on a pair of headphones, right? Which is like, wow. And for me, it's like that spend would be at around 1,000. I'd be like, wow, okay, this is going to be a big purchase for me, and I care a lot about this thing. It better be damn good. Straight up though, like if I were buying if I were coming at this cold, right, and I was going to spend $1,000 on a pair of headphones, I was just like, all right, I'm doing it, right? There are a number of headphones that I would choose. I would choose an Odyssey LCD2F 2021, or I would choose a Focal Clear or Focal LX, or a good deal would be an Lear with Utopia pads if you can still find that. I don't know if anybody's selling that right now, but that idea. I would look at a Hi-Fi Man Sundara, which 2020, which is like way less expensive. You know, maybe a Sundara and an LX, right? Then you could have both. That's probably what I would do. Yeah. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I hesitate. I would put the Borealis up there. I just wasn't a fan of the 5K issue, or 5.5K. But for the rest of the tuning there, the Borealis is very good. It's one of the few open back dynamic driver headphones that actually has a bass shelf. Part of a bass shelf. Not the whole thing. FHE Eclipse seems a little bass light. No, it's good joke. Well, I don't understand what is going on with DMS. I like how Jude shows an HE650 on his raw graphs. You can thank Metal for that. Although I'm sure he agrees that it's a good idea. All right, let's see. Ooh, a Tamchin collab with Crin would be really cool. Yeah. You know what's funny? I really like the Tamshin Darling's technical qualities. The tuning is so shouty. It gets much better with the final E tips, but it's a shouty boy, yeah. I've been experimenting with EQing treble air. Seems like you can go past the preamp without distorting, and it helps to unveil the sound. Can you add too much? Seems to me as long as you notch down any piercing frequencies, 10 to 12K, you can add as much air as you want. I don't think so. I think it really depends on the headphones, because like, for example, okay, well, in my view, the headphones that boost that, like, by default, don't sound right. Those frequencies should kind of taper off, not to the degree that the Target does. Like the Harman Target is, I actually think that the upper treble is like a bit of a measurement artifact there from before, when they were using, I don't remember exactly which pinna they were using at the time, but I think that's probably the issue there. But the ones that are really boosted in the air frequencies, I think they sound wrong. So with that in mind, though, yeah, a lot of whether or not it clips is going to be determined by what the playback is, plus your digital volume. So, and they're not all going to be equally, like, you're going to clip at the loudest point. The loudest point might not be the treble air frequencies. How a standard like a 650 measures on the same rig is more meaningful than generic Harman Target. I kind of disagree. I mean, yes, partially because as much as a lot of people have heard that, not everybody has. I think there's a couple things with that, because the HD 650 is not correct. Like, it's a colored, flavored kind of sound by every standard. Like, it's you know, both from an objective measured standard and standpoint, and also like people buy that headphone because it's warm. I think you have to do a little bit better than that to show here's what, you know, is perceptually normal. And I just don't think the 650 is. But to be clear, I really like it, but I don't think it's perceptually normal for the widest range of people. It's not far off. But yeah, it does not track the ear gain to a sufficient degree for starters, and then also it doesn't have, like, you could I think that the bass shelf, again, like, it's not like the bass shelf of Harman was arbitrarily adjusted by listeners. It was at a specific spot for where it's meant to match, you know, speakers basically, and so that's why it's there. The problem with that, though, is that we should never expect an open back headphone to have that kind of bass shelf. So when you see these evaluations or like reviews of, you know, headphone measurements where they don't have the bass shelf of Harman for an open back headphone, it's like, yeah, but we shouldn't expect that. Like, it's not like, so you can just throw that in there, right? Like, and also that's the reason why you might as well EQ it, because there are physical and acoustic limitations to doing that with open back headphones. So unless you just want to say everybody should listen to IEMs or closed back headphones, that's a different, you know, somebody could make that argument, but I disagree. I think there are way more challenges, you know, in other areas of the frequency response when you do that. But the reason why Jude does the HD 650 on the 5128 is only because there isn't available. Well, he does the 650 and I think a number of other headphones when he's showing. It's not, yeah, 650 is like a staple there, which is fine. But I think he's also a little bit cagey about using Harman. I wonder if that would be different if there was you know, available research on the 5128, the publicly available research, you know, that we could dive into. I mean, there's potentially ways to do that, to like derive that target. But yeah, at the moment it's probably much easier to just show 650s. Did I miss any? Hold on a second. Let me just double check. I didn't miss any. I don't think I missed any super chats. Yeah, no, I don't think I did. Yeah, the 2020 Sindara is like even just a little, you know, relaxed in the ear gain region. Just a little. But like the right amount of relaxed. My issue with the generic Harman target is produced for a specific rig and everyone ends up using the same Harman target on different rigs. Yeah, that's an issue. That should not. I mean, when people do that, that's just wrong. Like you shouldn't use like Harman with the 5128, for example. It doesn't make sense. Like not the Harman that was developed on, you know, the anthropometric. Like it basically the standard Gross rigs that you're using, the 711 couplers, like the one that Crin uses, the one that I use, the 45CA that Amir uses, Harman is fine for that. They're all compatible. Things get a little weird when you change the pinna to the 0065. I think that's what it's called. It's the larger one. That things get weird, but with anthropometric pinna, they should be cross comparable. But yeah, it's an absolute problem when you. Are you talking more with IEMs? Because I don't think the Harman IEM target is taken as seriously. I think there are also. I mean, Jude brings up a good point about, you know, with IEMs, and I think the 5128 is probably. I need to look more into that, but I think the 5128 is probably more representative. Well, it's definitely more representative, but like specifically for IEMs, it gets you a little bit like maybe the results would have been different if they had used a different rig. Wait, hold on. We'll keep going here for another 20 minutes. Okay. Don't feed the troll. Who's the troll? I don't see who's trolling. Any plans to review the Mark Levinson headphone, ANC headphone? Yeah, we actually have one in. I'm waiting for them to update the firmware because I don't think that they have that dialed in yet. It's funny, you see, you know, Sean Olive tweeting about, you know, it, and I know he was involved, and I spoke with him about it. Yeah, I think once they have that firmware, whatever the release firmware is, I'm not sure. I'll need to update it and evaluate that. My current take on it is that at least the passive mode was well implemented. The issue is my issue with it is that there's a 11K resonance that they might be working on trying to curb if they can. I hope they do, because it definitely had. It's like, I mean, I'd even go as far as to say their lower end headphones, Harman's lower end headphones, you know, were closer, but or didn't have that issue, right? But yeah, I would sincerely hope that they are able to fix that with a firmware update. That's the nice thing about those types of headphones, I guess, is that like you can update that. But no, actually, as far as the tech, like the detail and subjective performance and all that stuff, I thought it was pretty good for an ANC. Now not $700 better than a Momentum 3. I thought it was around Momentum 3, which is, it's funny. It's like the only ANC headphones that I've heard that have any sense of decent technical performance are like the Momentum 3 and this Mark Levinson thing, and to a lesser extent the PXC 550 Mark II. All the other ones I've listened to don't. They all kind of are not great. But yeah, the Mark Levinson one had decent performance. But it, like, don't treat this as like a judgment on it, because again, I need to update the firmware and actually do a final evaluation on it, because the one that we had was pre-production, and so I didn't have the final tuning in place. And that's also why I didn't make a post about it. The Harman wasn't produced specifically for the given rig. Yeah, I mean the problem there as well though is that not all 711 couplers, or not all 711 rigs have the same features. They probably, I mean, this is also one of the reasons I think why the target probably has to be smoothed. Will you review the Austrian Audio High X65? Yeah, if someone sends it to me. I don't have one around. Not an accusation. Headphones.com sells the LCD5. Yeah, but just like with everything else, there's no there's no influence from the store to any opinions for not just me but any of the creators. There's no connection there. So yeah, like if the LCD5 has those issues, then that's a problem. Like that ain't good. But the thing is, it's not like so the LCD5 that we received, the unit for review, didn't have that issue. I removed the cables many times, didn't have that issue, didn't pop out. And so it's like, how was I possibly, I mean, I think that the issue there is that it's kind of not a great design for the connectors. And but how is the reviewer supposed to know that if the problem doesn't occur when they're evaluating it, right? Yeah, I can go into more. I'll probably do another video at some point comparing LCD5, Susvara, and Utopia, and other headphones as well. Preference rating. So that is the, as much as I am a staunch defender of the Harman research, I think it's some of the most important research that's been done in audio. And people need to read the research because it's not what most people think, or at least not what I commonly see. My current gripe with Harman, apart from the fact that as much as I understand the use of 1/2 or 1/3 octave smoothing might be a requirement, it's frustrating that I don't have a high-res version, that I can't use a high-res version. But I'd probably have to EQ to my own gain factors anyways. But regardless, my main, I suppose, criticism of that is the predictive model, or the statistical model that predicts listener preference, and those ratings based on that. Because I think I mean, this is a good example of it. If a headphone is perfectly matched to Harman everywhere except for a particularly strong peak in the treble, that's worse in my view than if the same amount of deviation is spread out in a smooth manner across I don't know, some other area of the frequency response. So the more granular deviations, I think, cause a problem for the scoring system there, in my view. And like, There are times when one deviation can be, so like if you have one deviation at around 5K, another deviation further on in the treble can actually be better. It can sound better than if that other deviation wasn't there, right? Because effectively what's happening there is when a lower harmonic is emphasized over the upper harmonics, it can really throw things off. Sindar is 350, and I wouldn't buy it used. 6XX is 200, it's 220. And you can also get a used 580. 580, good luck getting that under $200. 600 and 650, yeah. So given the price difference, they are both good for the money. Yeah. Yeah, the Moondrop Kato is definitely on. Like I'm excited for that one against doing comparisons with that one. A KXXS was good too. I didn't like the treble of those ones though. So and I think that with the Aria, the treble balance was actually even a little better. So it'll be interesting to hear the Kato against others. But that's the current iteration of those designs, KXXS and whatever else. Let's see. Yeah, sorry, just to answer that question on the Kato. Yeah, it's just a refinement of that same idea, which is good. And I'm gonna see. I don't know if I can get a Hana 2021 up from Precog. I know he likes it a lot, so I'm just curious how the Kato and the Hana 2021 compare. Also with the Crin collab IEM. I don't really have a good source for acquiring review units of IEMs, especially. Oh yeah, yeah. Got to get back to making vids, man. Yeah. So when we talk about like technicalities, I evaluate things in a similar manner to the way Crin does, right? So there's both an objective side and then there's a subjective side. But I tend to lean a little bit more objective because I think that you can explain, well, you can theoretically explain the subjective side in terms of the objective stuff. It's just that that stuff's not easily available by looking at frequency response. What is easily available is the stuff like what Sean Olive is doing with predictive, preference and stuff like that, because you're analyzing it for the general tonal balance there. But if we had a high res or a unsmoothed target where we knew this is exactly how things are supposed to sound, then we'd probably be able to get closer to that and understand that better. I imagine at least we'd have to explore that before we can rule out frequency response, right? So I think right now frequency response is the most prudent place to look for technical performance, if that makes sense. And so the trick is going to be to do a much deeper dive on frequency response than and more importantly, a much deeper dive on frequency response targets than and the relationship between the result and the target than what we're doing currently. And so I mean, this is also one of the reasons why, like, if you look at like those EQ profiles that perfectly get things to match in the treble, it's like that is a coarse-grained result at best. As I made this big long post about like what my views are on EQ. I won't. It's not linked, but it's up on the Headphone community forum in my ranking list. And yeah, it's a crutch. And I think I described it like kind of like doing surgery with a blunt instrument. You know, you're not able to get things to be as precise as they probably should be, and there's a chance that you can ruin things. So for me, as much as I do EQ with just about every headphone, I would rather either not have to do EQ at all or do very, very minimal EQ. Precog likes the Hana a lot, Crin not so much. Again, I haven't heard the Hana, so I can't compare. I've heard all those the Moondrop ones, yeah, but I haven't heard the Hana. That's what I need to get in. Well, I shouldn't say I've heard all the Moondrop. I think there's some that I haven't heard. You weren't specific enough about the LCD performs without EQ versus with EQ. All right. I probably wouldn't, if I couldn't EQ it, I wouldn't get the LCD 5 over the Susvara. It's also strange that he had Susvara plus Utopia ranked in the highest tier in the channel description. What? Oh, is it on an older video? I'm not retroactively adding things to those videos, if that makes sense. What? I'm not sure. I'm not retroactively changing those rankings in the descriptions. Maybe like at some point I'll go through each video and change those. They're based on price bracket. They're not based on what I would personally choose. I think that's the problem too. And I'd hesitated with my ranking list. You know, people are bound to look at that and go, oh, you know, this is lower than this one, therefore he thinks this one sounds worse. And that's not like, that's not the case. It's more what I would personally choose for one reason or another. Like, and this is where it's really important to consider things like, you know, whether or not something is responds well to EQ. Because if something sounds amazing with EQ and responds well to EQ, that's going to be great for me, right? But if something doesn't respond well to EQ but sounds better than the other thing does before EQ, you know, I'll still prefer the one that I can EQ, if that makes sense. So what I would say there, Jinsei, is just look at the actual descriptions in the ranking list for why I would choose a given product, that to get a sense of that, because it's not just based on like what I think are the best to the worst, right? That's not what the intention was behind that. It was what I would choose at a given price and the reasons why. And that's basically it, right? Like there's no reason, like if you have a completely different thing, you know, thing that you care about, that you're like, I really care about this quality, or I really care about usability, or I really care about having it not be super heavy, which I also care about, right? The priorities are going to shift a little bit. Do you plan to do a blind test of amps that you consider lack dynamics compare an A90 with a high-end transparent amp of your choice? Yeah, so we actually do have an ABX box. It's a fun thing to say. I have one right now, but it's just a PCB, and so I'm working on the next version of that. I'm working on I'm having somebody work on a next version of that to send. Then once that's completed, I'll get right into doing you know, blind ABX comparisons with amplifiers. Because right now the problem is that like there's two problems. One is that if you're just, you know, comparing different amplifiers, there's the unplugging and plugging it in, so it's not instant, and then also the volume is potentially different, right? So, and then if you were to volume match perfectly, like you can try and get it close, but like if you were to do it perfectly, that takes even more time. which you can do, but it just takes even more time. So it's hard to get that immediate assessment. Which I mean, if anybody doesn't know, amplifiers they make such a small difference when you're at a good enough already situation. So that's really what I'm hopeful that the ABX box is going to reveal, and then I'll be able to publish the results. You know, even if the results are like it's all cited biases, that's interesting in my view. You know, might as well. And that's the interesting thing, is that just even if it turns out that it's all cited biases, which I'm skeptical of, but even if that's the case, that doesn't necessarily mean that counts for nothing. It just means that people are much more influenced by these things than they realize, which is just, that's interesting, you know. Hi-Fi Man Aria and Odyssey LCD X latest versions. Which one would you get? I don't remember where I put each of those in my ranking. The problem is that they're not priced the same. I think it also depends on whether or not you EQ. Certainly the Odyssey LCD X is better value. I'll say that much. You can get it for a lot less. But as far as the default sound quality out of the box, I tend to think that the Aria is a little bit more capable. Just a little bit. I was comparing, not against the LCD X, but I was comparing it against the LCD4. I was comparing the latest Aria, and the latest Aria is interesting because it is a little different, but not that different. But overall, it sounds very detailed. So, yeah, I don't know. So straight up though, if it's my money, like if it's actually my money, I'm probably getting the LCD X because it's less expensive. The Aria is also more comfortable, I guess, but yeah. Rob, thank you. At CanJam, was Precog enthrall from the Symphonium? Yeah, Precog loves the Symphonium Helios. My only issue with it is that the fit is a little awkward for me. I have a hard time with that. The long nozzles. Metal 571 and other reviewers describing the honky mids of the LCD5 makes it less of a flagship for me. I hate the Odyssey mid-range honk. Why do you think that is a common trait among Odyssey headphones? Because it's really not. I mean, the tuning that they ended up with the LCD5 is very different from the LCD4 and every other Odyssey headphone other than the Carbon. The Carbon and the 5 are now it seems to be like the tuning they're going for more now, which I agree. They're both a little on the shouty side. Honk is more. I almost think honk is lower down. Honk is like maybe 1K. And the LC5 is or is that what you're talking about? Are you talking about the 1K bump, not the upper mid shout? Because if you're talking about the 1K honk, then yeah, maybe there's something there. But I wouldn't. I'd still say they're very different sounding. Yeah, I like the LCD5 better than the LCD4. Like even just talking about sound quality, because I didn't try to reduce the upper mids. I just boosted the treble, right, to get that a little bit in line. And after doing that, I found it like I preferred that sort of like nimble aspect of the technicalities of the LCD5 more. Yeah, LCD4 is just dark in the upper mids. Like they've always been like that. Even the 2021s. Or I guess with the 2021 pads. Future of headphones. Any upcoming news to be excited about? Yes. Yes, I am excited about many things. Things I can't talk about. Sasfara, yeah, is still the king. Yep. For me, and what I index for. HE1000 SE is considerably more detailed than the Aria, but at the same time, the tuning is worse. I will hopefully do an XS Edition XS review, yeah, when we get one sent in. Yeah, I see earlier on here, we're talking about frequency response. I made a comment on Twitter like a while ago that frequency response is not target adherence. And what I meant by that is that like there's so much more contained within frequency response than just adherence and deviation from the target. That's one way to analyze it, and it's a very important way to analyze it, but there's so much more going on. And this becomes apparent when you look at what the actual gain factors are, especially in the treble of the human ear. And meaning that like we at least need to, before we start looking anywhere else for technicalities or, you know, various different other qualities, which, you know, maybe there is something else, but before we start looking somewhere else, I think we should probably exhaust frequency response and make sure that, you know, like my sense of it is that like the things that Corinne and I are going to be talking about with like detail and like, I don't know, resolving ability, I imagine that stuff is it's likely contained in frequency response somewhere, not target adherence, right? But that doesn't mean that there isn't also potentially something else, right? So that's more just like let's figure out what this is first. Or exhaust the thing that's right in front of us that we can measure or are measuring right now. I graphed a new LCD4 with 2021 pads, and it was more reminiscent of the pre-memory foam ones, but still dark. Anything you miss about Fuji? Yeah. There's just something about using that camera that I loved, because like I don't know if you like, for me, when I'm like, well, believe it or not, I really enjoy going outside for hikes, and I like to take my camera with me and take pictures of like, I don't know, nature shit and like landscapes and stuff like that. And that's basically what I would use that camera for most of the time if I wasn't doing live streams and you know, work stuff, right? And there's so much joy in using that camera for that stuff. So I imagine that I will probably eventually one day end up getting a Fuji again, but when I do, it's going to be a smaller one. It's going to be like a XS10 or something like that. Just for, you know, portability and ease of use. Sound syncing issues? Oh, I haven't set up the microphone for the delay that you usually get. This is a Beyerdynamic Fox microphone, because we bought the Tiger 300R and Fox microphone for review, so that's coming out tomorrow. Oh, here's a good question. How much variation is there in individual HRTF? Could it actually be possible for someone to find an LCD neutral? Unlikely. For the last bit, it's very unlikely, because depends which LCD. Let me be clear. But specifically, if you're talking LCD4 and like those ones, unlikely. Because, so the way I understand it is that individual ear gain can differ, but as long as we have all the same pieces to the ear, you know, like the pinna, like unless you have an ear cut off or something, right? You've got the same pieces, right? You've got the pinna flange, you've got the concha part, you've got the ear canal, right? And so the specific factors can vary in degree, but you know, a headphone like an LCD4 that just, it doesn't have ear gain going on at all in certain places, I don't know if anybody is going to find that neutral. Because yeah, like what I've sort of figured out is that like there's a question mark when it comes to level of ear gain at the highest point, around like 3K ish, maybe even, yeah, like right, somewhere around there. So that's one, right? But remember that it's not just one factor necessarily, right? There's multiple factors, but there's also when we're talking about like anything above 4 or 5K, all that stuff can shift. It can be in slightly different places. So for individual people, and also the amplitude can, or the level can be slightly different as well. So what I've been told is that it's basically a crapshoot up there, and you have to you might as well leave that stuff alone, as if you're able to. Because there's no way of knowing exactly where it is for you unless you're doing sine sweeps and checking for this, and that's why I say it's a good idea to do that. Sorry, if I'm not sure if that answers that question, but yes, there is definitely some variation there. I think the bigger question, though, and this is something that I pose to people, and I'd love to know and get an answer to this, but it's something that Tile mentioned years ago, which is that, you know, we've been living with these gain factors our whole lives. So why is there still disagreement about how things are heard? Right? If the brain is doing the same normalization for our own individual gain factors, right? Is there some unique interaction that's creating like an emergent result that's different from what those individual gain factors are when they're corrected? I don't know. I think, yeah, theoretically, there should be a lot more agreement than there is difference. And maybe there is. It's, you know, and maybe the disagreement comes more from expectation and preference for how people want their music to sound. No, but I mean, Metal, you know that I'm sure you've read that same article. You know that, and it makes a certain amount of sense. I mean, even if you just think about what, like, the fact that when you walk out into the world, it sounds normal to you, right? Normal should be the same. I don't see a reason why. Like, I mean, yeah, like the individual gain factors would be different, right? But you're correct. Your brain is correcting for that, and has been your whole life. So I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, and it's one that, like, my understanding from talking to people is that it's not enough to account for the differences that may actually exist, like the actual ear gain differences. But still, like, so basically the indication would be that a difference in frequency response at the eardrum reference point would indicate a different perceived result, and there's no way around that. But it's still puzzling to me. I saw something else. Oh yeah, why is distortion in headphones rarely mentioned? Because it hardly ever means anything. I mean, what was the threshold that there's a whole bunch of research papers on this, and they figured out that, like, it's imperceptible that what is it, nonlinear distortion, like harmonic distortion, is imperceptible below something ridiculously high, like even 1%. So, you know, it matters, though. Like, to be clear, when you're looking for certain things and you're trying to identify various different characteristics of the transducer, then yes, it's interesting for those reasons. But the main reason it's not mentioned is because it's not perceptible. I think where it matters more is when you're dealing with something where you're going to potentially EQ it, like adding a lot more bass, and there's already quite high distortion characteristics going on. Especially like higher than third order harmonic distortion, then that's an issue. Yeah, but like on those ribbon driver headphones, they all have fairly high, like actual ribbon driver headphones, they all have fairly high harmonic distortion in the bass. Would you do a video on how to EQ with sine sweeps? I'm going to do a video on the limits of EQ here soon, and then I'll also probably do a new video on how to EQ, because I want to update the old one. The old one, it's not necessarily wrong, it's just that the old one doesn't properly capture the fact that a highly smooth target is not necessarily going to be the right result for everybody. Or that it doesn't capture the reality of a coarse-grained target versus a fine-grained result. Let's see. Yeah, and at the same time, like, I do also think that, like, the brain does a lot of work. Like, my tolerances for this stuff are a little looser. Like, I'm picky about my tonal balance preferences, but that's why I EQ stuff, right? But like, I think generally, if you get within the ballpark, the brain does a lot of work. So as far as a recommendation goes, you know, even if it doesn't perfectly match, as long as it's reasonably close, I think you can say, okay, there's going to be a certain set of people who find this desirable, at least. I think you can be fairly confident about that too. For you, is noticeable at 10%? Wow. I mean, I think that's something you can also train yourself to listen for. So it might have been audible earlier on, but like, you know, actually noticeable, that might be a different thing. Like if it's intruding, I guess that might be the question. If you EQ headphones and if the driver cannot cope with it, you get distortion. The human ear can hear distortion above 1%, and some headphones have more than that. It depends on what type of distortion. If it's high order harmonic distortion, then yeah, you can hear that. But if it's like second and third order harmonic distortion, we've actually got a bunch of you can test this yourself if you want. We've done an article on simulating amplifier distortion. We did an article as well. Check the SeeAudio article and why SeeAudio is pointless that we did on headphones.com. It's on the learning and review section, and it's linked in the SeeAudio video as well, I think. And you can test this yourself and see if you can hear it. Basically, the problem with thinking of just like harmonic distortion, especially low order harmonic distortion, as meaningful is that certainly with music you have all kinds of auditory masking going on, but even with individual frequencies that you're playing, there is an auditory masking band, right, that second and third harmonic distortion will fall into at various different volumes, at various different levels. So your second order harmonic distortion can be actually quite high, and you still won't hear it, even with test tones, because it's too close in proximity to the fundamental. And similarly, you can take it the other way. If you're dealing with fifth order, if like a fifth order harmonic, then your threshold for that is like it'll be audible at way lower volumes. So it all depends on what kind of distortion it is, or what the distortion product is, I should say. At least that's how I understand it. And with music, again, it gets even more difficult because you're not listening to individual tones, right? All kinds of different tones are being token, right, by the music that's being played at various different elements of the frequency response. So you something that might actually be distortion, you'd have no idea. And auditory masking, like it just becomes even more difficult to discern. So we can. There's the threshold of hearing with test tones, and the threshold of hearing distortion with music, and they're different from one another. Like discernibility with music, it's quite a bit higher. Chord Dat guy talked about THD, something about not being able to hear the resolution, but the brain can perceive timing differences in spatial cues. Yeah, I don't know about all that stuff. That's like not to say that that's wrong. I'm just not like. I'd love to see some tests on that. You know, if you can demonstrate it, right? Then sure. All of your favorite music has a lot of distortion, and we love it. Well, there's that too. I had a thought though as well. Like there is, I don't know if this is true, and I need to do some research on this. But I was thinking about like some of the reasons why certain tube amplifiers might be preferred over solid state is potentially because there's audible harmonic distortion products, but they're low enough that all they're doing is filling in potential gaps in frequency response. Like I was thinking about that, like maybe there is actually a smoothing effect to this, and that's what people enjoy. But I'll need to do more research on that and see if that's actually why. So don't take that as that's like, I don't know if that's true. It's just something I'm curious about. Ever listen to the Kennerton headphones? Yeah, nothing all that special for me. I mean, it's some pretty significant front damping on the ones that I evaluated, and I just thought, nah, it's not for me. But there's a bunch that I haven't heard, right? So I can't give an assessment on all, just the ones that I have heard. If BA IEMs have high third order harmonic distortion, would dynamic driver with good timbre sound like a BA IEM if you could boost just the third order distortion? That's only the case if BA timbre comes from that third order harmonic distortion, which maybe. But it's tough to tell. So it could be that, but it could also be other characteristics, because the thing that I've noticed is that not all BAs have the same like timbre quality to them. And again, that's not to say that this stuff isn't also within frequency response or available in frequency response, but we just don't know where to look. But yeah, if it is third order harmonic distortion, then theoretically you could simulate that, I guess. But I'm not totally convinced that it is. It's just that seems like a very, like, I don't know. That's what's different about it, right? So like, let's explore that. It's the same thing like when people talk about like ultrasonic tones being perceivable even if they're not heard. If that claim is going to get off the ground, you need to be able to demonstrate it, right? And so I don't know. I don't want to rule stuff out, like maybe there's some other, like, perception is in general is a very deep and difficult concept or a difficult subject. And it's not uniquely like compartmentalized. Perceptual experiences are extremely complicated. So there's no reason, there's nothing to say that, maybe we don't hear that, but, maybe we could, I don't know, physically feel that or something, like, I don't know, as an example. There's one thing worth, if you're curious about that, there's a paper on inattentional blindness is a different thing. I think that's in psychology. No, but there's a paper where they set up they had a whole bunch of blind people who were like blind from, I think they were blind from birth, and they set up an obstacle course in front of them and had them go through the obstacle course. I'm butchering the story of the paper, the description here, but what they found is that they were actually able to navigate through the space, even though they couldn't, they weren't able to describe what it was that they were experiencing. So they had some. Basically, it was like the image centers in their brain, they were being bypassed, but the information was still getting to the relevant part of their brain. So, there's all kinds of stuff there that is just, that's its own mystery. what I was much more focused on at the time was locatedness of perceptions. So like when you feel something physically, like, you know, technically it's a perception that you're having, right, which should be here, but you feel it, you know, out there, the somatosensory experiences and proprioceptive experiences. So not necessarily focused on sound as much, but there is an element of affective consciousness to it as well, where, you know, there's a positive valence or a negative valence, you know, that you can talk about, you know, what their function is. And, you know, it's interesting with auditory stuff. There's actually, you know, there's reasons why we, you know, might be more, I guess, attuned to certain sounds than others. And so, you know, it's interesting. All right, guys, I think we've exhausted the topics for today. Thanks to everybody for participating. Thank you to Metal571 for all of the good work he's done in the chat. And thanks to Hi-Fi Go for sending the evaluation unit of the SeeAudio Yume Midnight. We don't use affiliate links, but if you want more information about that, I think they are the exclusive for it, I believe. So there's a link in the description for that. But yeah, I will see you guys in the next video. Actually, next video will be tomorrow. You're asking what my major in college was, and what did I study in postgrad? Yeah, I did 2 philosophy degrees. Or my postgrad was philosophy as well as my undergrad. But it's different from like what it's very different from what people think. But yeah, I don't know about Can Jam New York. I don't think I'm going to be going because we'll see what happens with the world, right? It's tough. Despite you guys were talking about the trolls in the stream, but like did they get yeeted out before I had a chance to address the comments? I didn't see. You know, what I like about the streams is that I'm able to. It's a good platform to have more, I guess, dialogue that's a little bit like, I don't know, raw and spicy, and so. I don't mind, you know, that if there's trolls, engaging with that or you know, dealing with it is fun sometimes. So yeah. Anyways, I will see you guys in the next one, and there'll be a video tomorrow, I think.